The dust rose thick in the
Ready to
air
ride?
as the auctioneer's voice cracked
Let's
across.
go.
The town square of Red Hollow, a place where mercy had dried up long before the wells did. Men gathered in a
Must
loose
you
circle,
go
boots
now?
scuffing the dirt,
I have
eyes
to.
sharp and hungry
It's
like
not
coyotes
safe
at
here.
dusk. This
Be
wasn't
careful.
an auction of cattle or horses. Everyone knew that. It was worse. It was people. Broken people. Mostly women who had lost everything to sickness, debt, or cruel men who signed papers with shaking hands and slept easy afterward. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low, jaw tight. He hadn't come to buy anyone. He told himself that again and again. He had only ridden into town for supplies, for nails and grain, and maybe a new rope. But the sound of chains and the hollow look in the eyes of the woman on the platform rooted him where he stood. She was thin, dressed in a faded blue dress that had once been fine. Her hands were bound loosely in front of her, more for show than necessity. She didn't cry. That was what struck Ethan most. Most women cried. Some screamed. Some begged. This one just stared ahead, eyes steady, face pale but proud, like she had already decided that whatever happened here would not take her soul with it. The auctioneer called her Lot 7, no name given, no past worth mentioning. Just a price. The first bid came fast. Then another, men laughing, nudging each other, already imagining ownership. Ethan felt his stomach turn. He should have walked away. He had no business here. He was a rancher, a widower, a man who had buried his wife under a cottonwood tree 6 winters ago and hadn't let anyone close since. The bidding climbed. Too fast, too high. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't know why his heart was pounding. He didn't know why his mouth went dry. Then he saw her flinch when one man grinned and said something filthy under his breath. Something inside Ethan snapped like an old fence wire pulled too tight. Before he could stop himself, his hand rose. His voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. The crowd turned. Some laughed when they saw him. A quiet rancher, known more for keeping to himself than throwing money around. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. Ethan named a price higher than he could easily afford. The crowd hesitated. A few more bids followed, but Ethan matched them, jaw set, eyes never leaving the woman. Finally, the hammer came down, sold. Silence followed, heavy and strange. Ethan felt no triumph, only a deep, unsettling weight in his chest. He paid without a word. The chains were removed. The woman stepped down from the platform and stood before him, close enough that he could see the faint scar along her jaw, and the way her hands trembled just slightly. She didn't thank him. She didn't ask questions. She simply waited, like someone who had learned long ago that expectations only led to disappointment. Ethan cleared his throat and told her she was coming with him. Not like an order, but like a fact. They mounted his horse, her riding behind him, careful, distant. The ride out of town was long and quiet. The sun dipped low, painting the land gold and red. Ethan felt her presence like a ghost from a life he had buried. When they reached his ranch, she dismounted and looked around slowly. The land was modest but well kept. A small house, a barn, fields stretching into the distance. This was not a place of cruelty. Ethan finally spoke, telling her she was safe here, that he hadn't bought her for what the others would have. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something flickered in her eyes. Confusion, suspicion, and something dangerously close to hope. She asked him why. He didn't have a good answer. He told her the truth as best he could, because it was wrong, because he couldn't stand by, because sometimes a man had to do one decent thing in a world full of bad ones. She nodded slowly. Then she told him her name was Clara. The name hit him like a blow. Ethan staggered back a step, staring at her face with new eyes. Older now, thinner, but unmistakable. Clara was the girl he had loved once before the war, before misunderstandings and pride had driven them apart. The woman he had believed dead, after hearing she'd been taken west and fallen ill. The woman he had mourned in silence. His voice failed him. Clara watched his face change, confusion turning to alarm. She asked what was wrong. Ethan whispered her name like a prayer and a curse all at once. Tears filled her eyes as recognition dawned. The world seemed to tilt. Of all the men in all the towns, it was him who had paid for her freedom. Fate, cruel and merciful all at once, had brought them together in the worst possible way. That night, neither of them slept. Words spilled between them like water breaking through a dam. Clara told him everything. How she had been tricked into marriage by a man who wanted her inheritance. How sickness took him and debt followed close behind. How she had been passed from place to place, working, enduring, until the auction was her last stop. Ethan told her of his wife, of his guilt, of the years he spent believing Clara had abandoned him or died, without ever knowing the truth. Regret hung thick in the room, but so did something else, relief. They were alive. They were here. The past had not won. Ethan made her a promise then. She owed him nothing. Not work, not loyalty, not love. When she was strong enough, she could leave if she wished. Clara listened quietly. For the first time in years, someone had given her a choice. Days turned into weeks. Clara stayed. Not because she was owned, but because she wanted to. She helped around the ranch, not as a servant, but as a partner. Slowly, trust grew where fear once lived. Laughter returned to the house. At night, they sat on the porch, watching the stars, speaking of small things and big regrets. Love did not come rushing back like before. It came careful and slow, shaped by pain but strengthened by survival. The town whispered, as towns always do. Some men mocked Ethan, others warned him. But he stood firm. When Clara finally stood beside him openly, head held high, the whispers began to die. Months later, under the same cottonwood tree where Ethan had buried his past, he married Clara not as property, but as his equal. The land seemed to breathe easier for it. Clara's eyes held scars, but also fire. Ethan's hands were rough but steady. Together they built something new from the ashes of what had been taken. They never forgot where they came from. They hired women who needed safe work. They fed travelers who came hungry. And when another auction was whispered about in a distant town, Ethan rode out, not with money this time, but with a gun and the law close behind him. Some evils, once survived, must be ended. The winter came early that year, rolling over the plains like a quiet threat. Clara felt it in her bones before the first snow fell. The ranch had begun to feel like home, yet the past still followed her like a shadow that stretched longer at dusk. Though Ethan treated her with a gentleness she had almost forgotten existed, there were nights when she woke gasping, her hands clawing at the blankets as if chains still bound her wrists. Ethan never asked too many questions. When he heard her cry out, he would sit nearby, silent and steady, reminding her without words that she was not alone anymore. Trust, he knew, was not rebuilt with promises, but with presence. The town of Red Hollow did not forget easily. Men who had once bid on Clara watched her from behind windows and saloon doors when she rode in beside. Ethan, some spat in the dirt, others smiled in ways that made her skin crawl. One man in particular, Jonas Pike, had not forgiven Ethan for outbidding him that day. Jonas was rich, cruel, and accustomed to taking what he wanted. He spread rumors that Clara was still Ethan's property, that she had been bought fair and square and could be taken again if papers were signed correctly. Those whispers reached Clara before Ethan heard them. Fear returned, sharp and cold. She wondered if safety was only temporary, if freedom could still be stolen. When Ethan learned of the rumors, something old and dangerous stirred in him. He rode into town and confronted Jonas Pike in the open street, not with fists or gunfire, but with the law he had quietly gathered: documents, witnesses, proof of illegal auctions, and forged debts. The sheriff, long bought and paid for, had no choice when faced with evidence sent ahead to the territorial judge. Jonas laughed until the handcuffs closed around his wrists. Clara watched from across the street, heart pounding, as the man who had once spoken her price was dragged away. For the first time, the fear loosened its grip. She realized Ethan had not just saved her once. He was willing to keep saving her, even when it cost him peace. Spring followed winter, and with it came work and renewal. Clara found strength she did not know she still possessed. She learned the land, learned the cattle, learned the quiet power of standing beside Ethan as an equal. Yet guilt gnawed at her. She believed she had ruined his life once by leaving, and now again by bringing danger to his door. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, she told him she planned to leave. She said it calmly, but her hands shook. Ethan listened, eyes fixed on the horizon. When she finished, he turned to her and said she was free to go, but if she stayed, it would be because she chose him, not because she owed him. The words broke something open in her. She realized then that love offered without chains was the only love worth accepting. Trouble did not vanish overnight. Former traders and buyers from distant towns began testing Ethan's resolve, riding near his land, leaving threats carved into fence posts. Ethan prepared quietly. He trained his hands, repaired old weapons, and spoke with neighboring ranchers who had lost sisters, daughters and wives to the same cruelty. A line was drawn in the dust. When violence finally came, it was swift and decisive. One night, riders approached the ranch, hoping to reclaim what they believed was still merchandise. They were met not by fear, but by men who had decided enough was enough. Shots rang out. Horses fled. Blood stained the dirt, but by dawn, the threat was gone. Clara stood beside Ethan afterwards, shaking but unbroken. She had survived worse. This time she was not alone. Months later, the ranch became something more than land and cattle. It became a refuge. Women arrived quietly, sent by word of mouth, escaping debts, bruises, and broken promises. Clara welcomed them, not as someone above them, but as one who understood. She taught them skills, gave them wages, and most importantly, choice. Ethan supported it all without hesitation. He had paid for one woman once in desperation. Now he spent his life making sure no one ever had to be sold again on his land. When Ethan and Clara finally married, it was simple. No grand crowd, just the wind, the cottonwood tree, and a promise spoken freely by two people who had been broken and chosen to heal together. Clara did not erase Ethan's past, nor did Ethan erase hers. They carried their scars openly, proof of survival rather than shame. The town slowly changed. Auctions stopped. Men learned that cruelty would be met with resistance. Red Hollow, once known for its dust and desperation, began to earn a different name. Years later, when Clara stood watching the sunset, a child's laughter ringing behind her, she remembered. The woman on the auction platform, the one who believed her life was over. She whispered a quiet goodbye to that version of herself. Ethan joined her, placing a hand in hers, not claiming, not owning, just holding. The land stretched before them wide and open, just like the future they had earned the hard way. Moral lesson: no human soul is meant to be owned, priced, or traded. True redemption is not found in power over others, but in the courage to protect, to choose justice when silence is easier, and to love without control. Even the darkest beginnings can lead to a life of dignity when one brave act opens the door to many more.